This is The Quiet End, and tonight I'll tell you a story titled The 13th Reel. Let's begin. Maya hadn't meant to wander so far from downtown. She was chasing inspiration, an elusive feeling that had her weaving through streets and forgotten alleys like a moth drawn to flickering light. It was almost dark when she found it, a building that shouldn't exist, tucked between collapsing warehouses and debris-strewn lots. An old theater. Its neon sign was long dead, but the faint outline of letters spelled Eclipse Cinema. The air felt heavy when she pushed the doors open, stale with disuse but underscored by something she couldn't quite place, a whispering quiet. Dust turned the posters into ghosts of an era long past, their faded titles unfamiliar, the faces of actors obscured by time's gray fingerprints. Maya set her camera down, unease prickling at her skin as she stepped in further. Her boots echoed against the cracked tiles. Each sound seemed swallowed before it could truly escape. She climbed the stairs, drawn to the projection room as if her steps weren't her own. It smelled like rust and mildew, but it was the film canisters on the shelf that froze her in place. Most were dented and unspectacular, except one. There it sat, alone on the far end of the shelf. Larger than the others, its tin was marred with gouges as if clawed at. The 13th Reel, the label read, handwritten in sharp, jagged lines that felt violent even on paper. And though the room was silent, Maya swore she felt, no, heard, it thrumming, almost alive. She reached for it, fingers hesitating over the edges. Something in the quiet shifted. It wasn't the kind of silence that made you calm. It was the kind that warned you the world had held its breath. Back in the cramped confines of her apartment, Maya threaded the dusty reel onto her old projector. It clicked and whirred to life, coughing as though rejecting the film she'd fed it. Her screen flickered, briefly black and white static, before it stabilized, revealing a scene frozen out of time. A party from the Roaring Twenties. At first it was quaint. Men in sharp suits strode around the frame, their movements jerky like marionettes. Women in feathered dresses laughed as they twirled in impossible grace. But soon the charm turned to disquiet. The longer Maya watched, the more the guests seemed wrong. Their smiles stretched too wide, their expressions flickered like a flame being blown by unseen winds. Faces would blur for an instant, then return, unfamiliar, reshaped. She leaned closer, and her breath caught as she saw the edges of the scene crumble. A man waltzed toward the center, only for his head to distort, elongating grotesquely before snapping back. In the crowd, a hand reached out for a champagne glass, but the arm it belonged to had disappeared mid-motion. Maya blinked, rubbing her eyes, only to feel terror flood her chest when the reel revealed something new. The camera had moved, no, shifted, on its own. The final moments of the clip focused on a figure standing at the far end of the room, apart from the revelry. A humanoid outline in dark, form-fitting clothes, its face obscured by a mask with hollowed eyes. It didn't move. It didn't blink. Yet Maya's stomach churned violently as she realized it wasn't staring at the other guests. It was staring straight at her, through the lens. Maya couldn't shake the unease from her chest. The masked figure haunted her thoughts, its motionless stare lingering far longer than it should have. Determined to make sense of what she'd stumbled upon, she sought out Louis Harrington, an eccentric film archivist she'd met at a local festival. His office smelled of old celluloid and ink, and shelves overflowing with reels lined the walls like mausoleum drawers. Louis greeted her with his usual charming arrogance, but that melted away the moment she showed him the reel. His hands trembled slightly as he loaded it onto his viewing equipment, and when the footage began, his expression turned ashen. He remained silent for several tense minutes, his eyes darting between frames as if trying to outpace his mounting terror. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. He told her about a production from the late 1920s, financed by a now-defunct studio eager to create a masterpiece. The film had been ambitious. Too ambitious, it seemed. The cast and crew began vanishing one by one during filming. Rumors emerged about unsettling sensations on set, whispers of curses tied to the script. It was never finished, and most of the footage was thought destroyed. This should not exist, Louis murmured, his fingers clutching at his seat's edge. He froze suddenly, and Maya followed his gaze to the final frame. It was the masked figure again, but something was wrong. The mask had changed. The smooth, featureless face now bore something chillingly familiar. It mirrored her. Maya's face, its eyes hollow like graves, its mouth fixed in a muted scream. Louis slammed the projector off, his breath shallow and frantic. "Burn it. Whatever you do, burn it," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of his fear. Maya was no stranger to long nights editing films in solitude. She'd even grown to savor the silence of her apartment as a kind of creative companion. But silence had taken on a different character as of late. It wasn't passive anymore. It listened, stretched thin, and bristled with anticipation. It started small. A glass she swore she'd left on the counter reappeared in the sink. Her lamp flickered, not with the steady hum of an aging bulb, but with a jittering pulse that felt alive. Then came the shadows, flickering in her peripheral vision, just at the edges of her awareness. Each time she turned, they were gone, but the room felt colder, hollower in their wake. By the third night, she began to hear it, a muffled, distant laughter. At first, it was so faint she thought it might be coming from the street. But there was no consistency, and it grew louder when the world outside should have been silent. It didn't even sound whimsical anymore. It was brittle, sharp, like glass splintering. Then the patterns from the reel began bleeding into her life. At the corner cafe, a waitress twirling a tray morphed mid-spin, her motions jagged like the revelers in the footage, gone in a blink, replaced by normalcy. Faces in passing windows blurred and stretched, as if smeared by invisible hands. And at night, just before she drifted into uneasy sleep, she'd see it again. The masked figure. It wasn't on her projector anymore. It was reflected faintly in her bedroom mirror, watching from the corner, its hollow gaze fixed on her until morning scraped it away. Desperation clawed at Maya's resolve as the reel's shadow wove itself deeper into her life. Louis's words, the mirrored mask, burn it, all played on repeat in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to destroy it. There was something about it, enticing, magnetic, like the reel itself wouldn't let her go. Her investigation led her to a dreary nursing home on the fringes of the city, where the faint scent of antiseptic mingled with forgotten years. The lead had been obscure, pulling her to Helene Nash, the elderly niece of one of the original crew members, a grip who had vanished during production in the 1920s. The woman was frail, her movements slow and deliberate, but her memory, though tangled, bore violent clarity when Maya mentioned the reel. "It wasn't just a film," Helene whispered, her voice trembling as her arthritic fingers fiddled with the edge of her blanket. "They said it was cursed, but it wasn't that simple. It captured something. A party, yes, but not any party bound by our hours or days." She leaned closer, eyes barely visible behind opaque lenses. It fed on them, their faces, their names, their lives, slowly. And when you watch it, you're drawn in. You don't realize it's happening until it's too late. Maya's stomach tightened in dread. Helene went on, how her uncle's memories had begun to dissolve before he vanished, replaced by fleeting images of figures in champagne-soaked rooms. People he didn't know but swore he recognized. "It takes pieces of you," Helene rasped, gripping Maya's wrist suddenly with surprising strength. "Those who see it, they're not the same afterward. Not whole." That evening, Maya drove home, her heart pounding in her chest. Her breath hitched as she unlocked her apartment door and realized she had no recollection of the street she'd just turned on, no memory of where she had parked her car. She froze in the entryway, her thoughts blurring as if scenes of her life had been scattered like an incomplete storyboard. The reel wasn't taking her all at once. It was erasing her in fragments. Maya's nights were no longer her own. The masked figure claimed them, relentless in its intrusion. She would wake in fits of cold sweat, heart pounding, to the feeling of its presence looming at the foot of her bed. It never moved, never touched her, but its whispers filled the air, indecipherable yet pulse-draining. Maya tried to scream once, but her voice crashed against a barrier of silence, smothered before it could leave her throat. And then, it spilled into the waking world. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, the faint outline of the figure reflected in her bathroom mirror, only for it to vanish the moment she turned around. A shadow stretched impossibly long from the corner of her room that faded as sunlight flickered through her blinds. But the moments grew frequent, more deliberate. She couldn't escape it, and worse, she couldn't convince herself it wasn't real anymore. Reality paled every time its hollow gaze crossed her path, as if the figure siphoned the vibrant colors of her surroundings. In a desperate attempt to ground herself, Maya returned to the real. She thought maybe seeing it again, confronting the haunting directly, might provide clarity, or at least control. But when she threaded it through her projector, the footage betrayed her. Whole scenes had disappeared. Entire stretches of footage she swore she'd seen before were gone, replaced with blank frames or distorted images that made her stomach lurch. The dancers' movements had grown almost boneless, their limbs bending at inhuman angles. And in the spaces where faces should have been, there was nothing, just voids, as if the real was shedding identities like autumn leaves. The masked figure, however, remained constant. In one frame, it was closer than before, its hands extended toward the lens. And for the briefest moment, Maya thought she saw something clawing behind the mask, something struggling to take hold of its vacant form. She stumbled back as her projector stopped abruptly, the reel popping free like it had expelled itself. Maya stared at the blank screen, her breathing shallow, shakily realizing the film wasn't just playing anymore. It was rewriting itself. Maya clutched the reel like it was some venomous thing, her resolve trembling but unbroken. Destroy it, she thought. End it. She drove back to the abandoned theater, weaving through the dark streets with her grip stiff against the wheel. But when she arrived, something was wrong. Or rather, everything was wrong. The theater was no longer the silent ruin it had been. The flickering light of unseen projectors spilled onto the cracked sidewalk, and the muffled sound of music seeped through the air like a poisonous fog. It was the same tune from the reel, haunting, vibrant, wrong. Maya's heart hollowed as she stepped inside. They were there, waiting. The figures from the footage, the dancers whose faces alternated between joy and hollow distortion. They were alive, yet not. Their motions were marionette-like, abrupt twirls and jagged steps that defied reason. The theater pulsed around them like a living thing, its walls seemingly breathing in tempo with their unnatural rhythm. Cold sweat trickled down Maya's spine as the figures turned toward her in unison. They moved without transitions, as if an invisible editor had cut their gestures mid-frame. Then, as 1,000 fractured voices merged into one, they called her name. Maya, the echo hissed, jagged and uneven. Arms reached out, beckoning her, not with malice, but with a dreadful invitation. It was then she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror by the concessions counter. At first, it was a stranger staring back. Then it wasn't anything at all. Her face was gone, a blurred void, featureless like smeared paint. Panic clawed at her chest. She couldn't remember the curve of her own smile, the shape of her jaw, the color of her eyes. Her identity, herself, it was slipping, drained like the faces on the reel. Just one step closer, the figures beckoned, their broken motions looping endlessly. And deep in her mind, beneath the terror, Maya felt the reel's pull growing irresistible. Join us, the invisible whisper urged. You've already begun. Maya took a step forward, her feet moving not by will, but by some unseen pull, some thread winding tighter around her soul. The dancers on the theater floor parted like curtains, making space for her among their unnatural ranks. Their distorted faces flickered in and out of focus, fragments of people lost in time. She wanted to scream, to run, but there was no air in her lungs, no fight left in her feet. Somewhere in the shadows, the masked figure waited. The reel's pull was complete now. The party enveloped her, the jazz music swelling until it was the only sound in the world. When the masked figure emerged, walking toward her with slow, deliberate strides, Maya could only stare. Its hollow gaze mirrored her emptiness, and as it reached for its face, she realized she was trembling, not in fear, but in recognition. Slowly, it removed the mask. Her own face stared back at her, hollow, void, a warped version of herself, stripped of humanity, of memory, of meaning, and yet it felt perfectly familiar, as though this was what she had always been, even before the reel. The figure tilted its head at her, almost curiously, before stepping aside and beckoning her forward. She reached out, unable to stop herself, stepping through the veil, becoming one of them. The reel spun to its last frame, the flickering shadows dissolving into static. Within moments, the theater fell silent, empty once more. Only the faint whisper of jazz remained, curling ghost-like through the air before fading entirely. And as the reel rewound itself, waiting for the next to stumble across it, the question lingered, unanswered. Did Maya ever exist at all? Or was she only ever part of the story, trapped in the 13th reel's endless rhythm? So tell me, dear listener, if you stumbled upon the 13th reel, would you dare watch it? Or wonder if it's been watching you all along? Subscribe for more chilling tales, and hit the bell to stay in the dark. See you at the next Quiet End.